I never thought a day would come when I would feel betrayed in my own home by the very people I loved most. I had always prided myself on being a patient mother, a careful provider, and a woman who valued dignity above all else. But on that evening, the night my son Ethan married Juliet, every carefully nurtured belief about family and trust would be tested in ways I could not have imagined. The day had begun like any other, calm and unassuming. I had made tea, arranged flowers in my favorite vase, and looked out the window at the autumn leaves swirling in the breeze. My apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and lemon from the candles I had lit, and I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the quiet. I had always loved mornings like this, moments when life seemed slow enough to breathe fully. Ethan had called early to confirm that I would be attending the wedding, his voice cheerful, but just distant enough to hint at the tension that had been building over the last few months. Juliet, I could sense even through the phone, was different, insistent, impatient, always asking for one more favor, one more concession. I had chosen to see the best in her, as a mother must when a son brings a new partner into his life. But deep down, I felt the faint tremor of unease that sometimes rises in your chest when something feels off, even when you cannot put your finger on it. At the ballroom that evening, the air was thick with perfume, polished wood, and the distant hum of conversation. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the polished floors, and waiters moved gracefully among the guests, carrying trays of sparkling drinks. I was dressed in my finest gown, soft navy silk that caught the light without demanding it. My hands, though slightly trembling with anticipation, were steady as I held Ethan's arm and walked toward the ceremony room. It began subtly, a whispered comment here, a suggestion there, that perhaps I should consider signing over a few property matters before the wedding, that my investments might be better managed by younger hands. At first, I dismissed it as nerves, as the over-eagerness of a bride's entourage. But then, the remarks became bolder, more pointed. Juliet would smile sweetly at me and say things like, "You know, Mom, it would be so much easier if we just had access to the keys," as if it were a casual request, rather than a demand cloaked in a false charm. My heart sank, and I felt the faint pulse of fear not of losing material things, but of losing respect, the very dignity I had carried through decades of life. Then, the unthinkable happened. In the middle of the ballroom, while guests were mingling and the band played softly in the background, Juliet stepped forward, her eyes flashing with a cruel certainty I had never seen in her before. She slapped me across the face. The sting of her hand burned my cheek, but the deeper wound was the shock, the betrayal, the realization that she believed she had the right to touch me, to demand my house keys as if I were an object to be claimed rather than a person to be respected. The room fell silent, a vacuum of tension that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Crystal glasses tinkled somewhere in the distance, a fork fell on the marble floor, and yet all of it was muted under the roar of disbelief in my own ears. I could feel every eye on me, some in shock, others in judgment, and some most dangerously uncertain about what they should believe. In that moment, I understood the cruel genius of their plan, to make me appear irrational, volatile, unfit, a woman incapable of reason or control. But I did not crumble. I drew a slow, deliberate breath and met Juliet's gaze with a calmness that surprised even myself. "You will not touch me again," I said, my voice quiet but firm, carrying across the room like a bell of warning. "And the keys are not yours. You will respect my home and my choices, or you will face the consequences of your actions." Ethan tried to intervene, his face a mixture of panic and desperation. "Mom, it's fine, we were just joking," he stammered, but the apology sounded hollow, rehearsed, unconvincing even to him. Juliet scoffed and muttered under her breath, and I knew without being told that this was part of a deeper, longer plan, one that had been months, perhaps years, in the making. I excused myself from the room with Carlos, my trusted advisor, leaving the guests to murmur and speculate. In the quiet of the car, I felt the weight of betrayal settle onto my shoulders, heavy and oppressive, but I also felt something else, a spark, a realization that for the first time in years, I would not allow fear or love alone to dictate my decisions. I would confront this, not with tears, not with anger alone, but with strategy, with resolve, with truth as my weapon. Over the next 3 days, my apartment became a sanctuary. Joseph brought coffee each morning, Lucy offered her insights and investigative skills, and Amelia, my longtime friend from the real estate sector, helped me piece together the full extent of their plans. Phone calls and messages from Ethan and Juliet became increasingly frantic, their desperation evident in 37 calls, 14 messages, and 2 visits from Juliet's parents demanding that I fix what they believed was my wrongdoing. But I remained calm. I let them feel the full weight of their choices without giving in to panic or submission. It was during those mornings of quiet reflection that the reality became clear. They had plotted not just to humiliate me, but to declare me incompetent, to seize my property, to manipulate the law in their favor while painting me as irrational. Legal documents, emails, and witness statements uncovered by Amelia and Lucy confirmed the extent of their schemes. Even the neighbors had been misled into believing that I was losing touch with reality. Yet, through it all, I saw the pattern for what it truly was: a desperate attempt to cover greed with false concern. Carlos brought news of the legal front, confirming my suspicions. Ethan had filed a petition for mental competency evaluation, using sworn statements from wedding guests to frame my justified outrage as evidence of instability. I felt a surge of righteous anger, but I also felt a profound clarity. This was not just about protecting myself anymore. It was about standing as an example, about showing that dignity, respect, and truth can outlast deceit and manipulation. We started compiling our own evidence: photographs, medical records, correspondence, everything needed to defend not just my property, but my life's work, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I realized then that the battle ahead would not be fought with shouts or tears alone, but with patience, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Even in the quiet moments, I thought about the lesson unfolding before me. Love alone does not obligate you to sacrifice your well-being. Family ties are sacred only when they are mutual, respectful, and honest. When they are weaponized for gain, it is courage, not passivity, that defines your survival. And so, as I looked out my balcony at the autumn sun spilling over the city, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and resolve. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had also been awakened to my own power. The days after the wedding were tense but purposeful. I spent hours in my apartment surrounded by papers, folders, and the quiet hum of a city that carried on, oblivious to the storm in my life. Joseph arrived each morning like clockwork, balancing a tray with coffee, croissants, and a smile that somehow carried reassurance into the room. He never asked for updates. He simply sat beside me, listened, and reminded me that I was not alone. His presence was a balm to a soul still smarting from public humiliation. Lucy and Amelia became my eyes and ears in a world that suddenly felt treacherous. Lucy had a way of finding details that others would overlook: the subtle changes in bank statements, the inconsistencies in emails, the faint hesitations in voice recordings. Amelia had a lawyer's intuition, able to spot the legal vulnerabilities in every document, to predict the next move before it was even made. Together, they were a shield, a lifeline, and a lens through which I began to understand the full scope of Ethan and Juliet's betrayal. It started with the financial records. I had always trusted my son and his fiancée to respect my boundaries, to understand that my home and my savings were not theirs to command. But the documents Lucy uncovered told a different story. Juliet had been consulting with lawyers who specialized in declaring seniors legally incompetent. They had drafted plans, contingency clauses, and legal strategies for months, if not years, to wrest control of my assets. My heart sank with every page I read. The world I had built, the independence I had fought for since Ethan was a boy, was under siege by the very people I had trusted to honor it. The more we uncovered, the more sinister the plan appeared. Emails hinted at Plan B conversations, coded language between Juliet and her legal contacts. They were preparing to use my justified reaction at the wedding as evidence of instability. Every moment of embarrassment, every tear shed in frustration, they intended to twist into a tool for their gain. The magnitude of their deception left me hollow with disbelief. I felt anger, yes, but also a sharp, crystalline clarity. They had underestimated me. They had misjudged the quiet strength of a woman who had lived through decades of trials, disappointments, and betrayals, yet refused to bow. Joseph broke the silence one afternoon as we pored over a series of videos from the wedding. "Aurora, look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. Guests had recorded the confrontation, the slap, the tension in the ballroom. At first, I winced at the sight of myself recoiling, the redness on my cheek, the shock frozen in my expression. But then, I noticed something else. I was not cowering. I was composed. I had spoken with authority, with clarity, with undeniable presence. These videos, Joseph reminded me, would show the truth to the world. Not a senile old woman losing control, but a mother asserting her dignity in the face of manipulation. Amelia leaned closer to examine the emails and legal drafts. Aurora, they've even been visiting neighbors, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Juliet is spreading rumors that you're unstable. They want witnesses who will testify that you've lost touch with reality. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The cruelty of their calculated strategy was staggering, but it also crystallized my resolve. I would not let their lies become truth. I would fight not with rage alone, but with the law, with documentation, and with the undeniable force of evidence and reason. Carlos arrived that evening, his face grave, his briefcase full of documents that confirmed our findings. Mrs. Hughes, he said, setting the papers carefully on the dining table, Ethan has filed a preliminary petition requesting a mental competency evaluation. They have already gathered statements from wedding guests who they say witnessed your erratic behavior. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They are counting on the public humiliation to make their case. But we have something stronger. We have proof of their conspiracy, witnesses willing to tell the truth, and the videos that show your dignity and composure. I nodded, feeling a sense of focus that I hadn't felt in years. Fear had been replaced by determination. Humiliation had been replaced by strategy. I began assembling my own folder of evidence, each page a declaration that I would not be intimidated. Photographs of the slap, medical documentation, financial records, emails, witness statements, all neatly organized, all ready to expose the truth. I realized then that courage alone was not enough. Preparation, diligence, and clarity were what would ensure justice. Over the next few days, Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia worked tirelessly with me, helping to coordinate witnesses and verify every piece of evidence. We rehearsed statements, discussed potential courtroom tactics, and strategized for every scenario Ethan and Juliet might try to throw at us. Their desperation became evident in the calls and messages that poured in, increasingly frantic and pleading, ranging from legal threats to emotional manipulation. Each one only strengthened my resolve. They were attempting to weaponize my compassion, but I had learned that love without boundaries invites harm. One morning, Lucy arrived with news that made my blood run cold. Aurora, I found something that goes even deeper than we thought, she said, handing me a folder that smelled faintly of ink and fear. Inside were documents detailing Juliet's consultations with attorneys on the nuances of mental competency law, her strategy for convincing neighbors to testify against me, and drafts of petitions designed to paint my legitimate defense as irrationality. The breadth of their plan was staggering, but in a strange way, it also gave me a strange calm. I now understood the full battlefield, and in knowing the battlefield, I knew my next moves. Joseph took my hand gently. You are not alone, Aurora. This is not just a fight for property. This is a fight for your dignity, your life, your very self. His words were simple, but they carried the kind of clarity that cuts through confusion and fear. I felt a surge of gratitude for these friends who had become more than allies. They had become extensions of my own strength. By the end of that week, the foundation of our defense was solid. Legal counsel had been consulted, evidence meticulously organized, and a strategy developed that balanced the undeniable truth of the betrayal with the calm authority of a woman who refused to be intimidated. I allowed myself one moment on the balcony, breathing in the crisp morning air, the smell of wet leaves and distant city traffic, and I realized something profound. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel fear. I felt purpose. It was during that reflection that I made a decision I had been holding back for years. I would not only defend myself, I would tell my story publicly. I would show the world what manipulation looks like, what elder abuse looks like, and how even the most carefully hidden plans of greed can be uncovered by truth, courage, and persistence. If Ethan and Juliet wanted war, they would have it, but it would be a war fought on my terms, with evidence, integrity, and the unwavering support of those who truly cared about justice. The morning I decided to act, the air felt electric, as though the city itself had taken notice of my resolve. I woke before sunrise, the soft hum of traffic below my balcony mixing with the distant chirping of birds. I made coffee slowly, savoring the aroma, letting the warmth seep into my hands and settle into my chest. Today, I would no longer allow myself to be the victim of manipulation. Today, I would reclaim not only my property, but my dignity. Joseph arrived with his usual calm presence, carrying a folder thick with notes and witness statements. "Aurora," he said quietly, "we're ready. The documents, the videos, the testimony, everything is organized. You won't be alone in this." I nodded, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, letting his reassurance anchor me. I had been alone in my fear for months, but now, with this support, I felt a clarity I hadn't known since Ethan was a boy. Lucy and Amelia arrived shortly after, each carrying stacks of papers, tablets, and laptops. Lucy had already cross-checked every financial transaction, every suspicious email, every attempt Juliet had made to manipulate neighbors. Amelia had drafted legal arguments, anticipating Ethan and Juliet's moves, and had a plan for presenting the wedding videos in court. The three of them had become extensions of my resolve, the solid wall of defense I hadn't known I could muster. When Carlos arrived, the gravity in his eyes confirmed what I had already suspected. This would be a legal battle, and they were taking no prisoners. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, setting his briefcase on the table, "they are underestimating you, but we are prepared. I have coordinated with the judge, and we have enough evidence to show that this is not a case of incompetence, it is a case of manipulation and attempted exploitation." I felt a surge of calm. The fear that had once gripped me so tightly had been replaced by strategy. The court date was set for the following week. Each day leading up to it, I woke early, reviewing documents, speaking with my legal team, and rehearsing my testimony. I practiced not just the words, but the composure, the tone, the slow, measured cadence that would convey confidence rather than desperation. The wedding videos, once a source of humiliation, had become my secret weapon. Every time I watched them, I saw myself not as a woman being attacked, but as a mother reclaiming her power. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom felt cold and intimidating, a space designed to make you doubt yourself. Ethan and Juliet were there, their expressions a mix of arrogance and forced civility. The judge glanced at me briefly, then at the evidence Carlos had presented, and finally at the couple who had once believed they could intimidate me. Witnesses were called, each recounting the events of the wedding night with a clarity that revealed the truth. I had been provoked, yes, but I had responded with measured assertiveness, not irrationality. When the videos were played, the courtroom fell silent. I watched myself on screen, the slap, the confrontation, the tension in the room, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I saw a woman standing firm, defending her rights, refusing to bow to intimidation. Gasps from those unfamiliar with the full story punctuated the silence, and I felt a small, private victory inside me. The truth was undeniable, and for the first time, the world could see it. Juliet's defense tried to argue emotional instability, portraying my actions as irrational and unpredictable. Ethan attempted to frame my objections to handing over my property as vengeful and petty, but every claim they made was undermined by documentation, witness statements, and the very video evidence they had once hoped to manipulate. Each lie they told was met with calm, factual refutations. Amelia's cross-examinations were precise, piercing the fog they had built with months of preparation. Carlos presented the financial records with the same clarity he had shown me in private. I could feel the shift in the courtroom, a growing recognition that the power they had assumed over me was nothing more than illusion. By the end of the day, the judge leaned back, reviewing the evidence. It was clear, Ethan and Juliet had not only failed to demonstrate any instability on my part, but they had actively conspired to take advantage of me. The ruling was swift and decisive. They were fined for legal frivolity, ordered to pay my attorney fees, and any attempts to declare me incompetent were dismissed entirely. Their financial standing, already precarious, collapsed further under the weight of the legal consequences. As I walked out of the courthouse, the crisp air filling my lungs, I felt a wave of liberation I hadn't anticipated. The humiliation, the fear, the relentless anxiety it was lifting, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia flanked me, their smiles unrestrained. For the first time since that night, I could imagine life not as a series of obstacles, but as a canvas upon which I could paint a future of my choosing. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat on the balcony, the city lights sparkling below. I thought about the events of the past months, the betrayal, the courage it took to stand firm, and the profound support of those who had refused to let me face this alone. It occurred to me then that my story could be more than personal vindication. It could serve as a warning, a lesson, and a beacon for others who had endured similar betrayals. The next morning, I contacted a journalist I had admired for years, someone known for integrity and sensitivity. I explained my story, providing documents, videos, and witness contacts. The journalist listened carefully, asking questions not just about the events, but about the emotional toll, the moral implications, and the lessons learned. By the end of the conversation, there was a shared understanding. This story needed to reach as many people as possible, to educate, to protect, and to inspire. Social media became the next battlefield. We released videos, posted evidence, and shared carefully considered reflections. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of messages poured in from seniors, caregivers, and family members who had faced or were facing similar situations. They thanked me, shared their own stories, and expressed hope that my courage could empower them to act. It was astonishing. Pain transformed into purpose, humiliation into advocacy. In the weeks that followed, the story gained national attention. Television interviews, newspaper articles, and online platforms amplified the message. Abuse of seniors, even by family, is real, pervasive, and preventable. I spoke not as a victim, but as a guide, a mentor, someone who had walked through the darkest moments and emerged with dignity intact. Each interview was emotionally taxing, yet profoundly liberating. I could finally speak openly about fear, betrayal, resilience, and justice, and in doing so, I discovered a new calling. By the end of the year, I began laying the groundwork for the Aurora Hughes Foundation. The mission was clear: to provide legal, emotional, and educational support to seniors navigating abuse, coercion, or financial exploitation. Joseph agreed to serve as vice president, Lucy took on educational programs, and Amelia continued as legal consultant. What had begun as personal defense had evolved into a movement, a tangible resource to protect others from the kind of betrayal I had endured. The first months after the court victory were a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I had expected to feel triumphant, victorious even, but what I felt most was an overwhelming sense of stillness. The chaos that had consumed my life for months had suddenly ceased, leaving a silence that was both comforting and disorienting. I spent mornings on my balcony, watering my plants, watching the city awaken beneath me. The smell of fresh soil, the soft rustle of leaves, and the occasional chirp of a bird became my new anchors. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the constant tension of dread pressing on my chest. Joseph became my daily companion, often bringing pastries from the local bakery. We'd sit together, sharing tea in quiet moments of reflection. He never asked me about the past. He simply listened when I chose to speak. Sometimes, I'd recount small details of the wedding night or the discovery of the conspiracy, and he would nod, his calm presence reassuring me that the nightmare was truly over. Lucy and Amelia remained by my side as well, helping organize files, coordinating with lawyers, and planning outreach for the foundation. It was remarkable how these friendships, forged in crisis, had become lifelines. The foundation's work began slowly. I spent hours each day responding to messages from seniors who had suffered at the hands of their own children. Their stories were heartbreakingly familiar: subtle manipulations, financial coercion, emotional blackmail. I listened to each carefully, noting patterns, collecting documents, and providing guidance. Sometimes the stories made my heart ache. Other times, they fueled a righteous anger I hadn't known I still possessed. We began holding workshops, teaching seniors to recognize early warning signs, to set boundaries, and to seek legal advice before it was too late. The first few sessions were small, but word spread quickly. Within months, our attendance had tripled, and calls for help came from across the city. The media attention that followed was both validating and surreal. National television networks reached out, journalists requested interviews, and social media exploded with supportive messages. I was nervous at first, imagining that speaking publicly would somehow reopen wounds I had worked so hard to close. But every time I shared my story, I felt a sense of liberation, as though each word was a brick removed from the walls of fear that had confined me for so long. The story of the wedding night, once a source of shame, had become a symbol of courage. People were not seeing a frail, senile woman, they were seeing someone who had refused to be exploited, who had set clear boundaries, and who had fought for her dignity. Writing became a crucial part of my healing. I documented every detail, not just the dramatic moments, but the quiet realizations, the subtle manipulations I had ignored, the emotional exhaustion I had tolerated, the lessons learned from standing firm. These reflections formed the backbone of my first book, When Love Hurts, and Elders Stand Against Family Exploitation. The process was cathartic. Every page I wrote reminded me that my experiences, as painful as they had been, could now serve a higher purpose. The book became more than a memoir, it was a guide, a manual for seniors navigating treacherous family dynamics. Ethan and Juliet had vanished from my life entirely. The court's ruling had left them financially devastated, and their attempts to reconcile were insincere, motivated only by self-interest. Ethan called once, pleading for financial assistance, but I refused. Juliet sent desperate messages about the unborn child they claimed needed support, yet even this did not compel me to compromise my principles. I realized painfully that love alone cannot fix those unwilling to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Protecting my dignity and well-being had to come first, and any attempt to rescue them from the consequences of their choices would only perpetuate the cycle of abuse. Over the following year, the foundation flourished. Joseph became more than a neighbor. He became my right hand, lecturing on financial abuse, mentoring seniors, and sharing practical strategies to prevent exploitation. Lucy moved into the apartment next door after her own difficult divorce and took on educational initiatives. Amelia handled legal consulting, ensuring every case we took on had a solid foundation. Together, we created a network of support that went beyond simple advocacy. We provided tangible tools, emotional guidance, and legal recourse. The work was demanding, yet deeply fulfilling. Physically, I felt transformed. The constant anxiety that had plagued me for years dissipated. Sleep became restorative. My posture improved, and even my voice, once tinged with hesitation, now carried firmness and authority. Dr. Hernandez, my physician, noted that my stress levels were lower than they had been in decades. I had found a rhythm of life that combined purpose with peace, a balance I hadn't known was possible. Gardening, teaching at the community center, and writing for the foundation occupied my days, filling them with both calm and meaning. Even my interactions with family became defined by boundaries. I no longer felt compelled to justify my choices to Ethan or Juliet. When their paths crossed mine, it was brief, formal, and guided entirely by principle. I learned to grieve not for the people they had been, but for the illusions I had held about our relationship. The love I once poured into a toxic dynamic was now redirected toward empowerment, toward building a life that honored my worth and experiences. The letters I received from seniors were particularly moving. One woman, Margaret, wrote to me after recovering from a financial betrayal at the hands of her own son. Her words, filled with gratitude, reminded me why every painful step I had taken was necessary. "You taught me," she wrote, "that boundaries are not cruelty, but survival. You showed me that self-respect is a necessity, not a luxury." It was in moments like these that I understood the full impact of my actions. My personal victory had become a beacon for others, and in that, I found an enduring sense of purpose. By the time I turned 70, my life had taken on a rhythm that I could never have imagined 2 years prior. The apartment that had once felt like a battleground of greed and betrayal had become a sanctuary of purpose. Sunlight poured through the balcony windows, illuminating my books, my plants, and the letters from seniors who had regained their independence because of the foundation. Each morning began with a quiet reflection, a cup of tea, and a glance at the city below, a city that once had witnessed my humiliation but now seemed to witness my resilience. The Aurora Hughes Foundation had grown far beyond what I had initially envisioned. We had opened 2 additional regional centers, and our team now included lawyers, social workers, and psychologists, all committed to protecting seniors from abuse. Carmen, our coordinator, kept meticulous records of each new case, and the stories she brought me often mirrored my own. Adult children pressuring their parents for money, subtle manipulation turning into coercion, threats disguised as concern. Each file was a reminder of the importance of our work. I could see my past reflected in theirs, and it fueled my resolve to help them reclaim their dignity. Joseph was still by my side, though now he wore the title of vice president of the foundation with pride. His eyes sparkled with a new energy, the same energy I had seen in my own reflection after reclaiming my life. "Aurora," he said one afternoon while we reviewed case files, "I never imagined my golden years would be like this. A detective of family deception, and yet, it's the best adventure I've ever had." We laughed, but the laughter was bittersweet. layered with the knowledge of the pain we had both endured. Lucy had moved into the apartment next door, and together we strategized educational programs for seniors. Her role as director of outreach allowed her to use her teaching skills in a way that truly mattered. Amelia, my steadfast friend and legal advisor, ensured that every case we took on had the strongest legal foundation possible. Together, our little circle had transformed from survivors to advocates, from witnesses to protectors. Each day, we fought not just for justice, but for awareness, teaching seniors to recognize manipulation before it escalated, empowering them to set boundaries and reclaim control. The public response to my story continued to grow. Interviews, television appearances, and social media engagement reminded me daily that what had been a personal struggle had become a national conversation. People were sharing their own stories, inspired to take a stand for themselves, and I realized that the ripple effect of my courage had become larger than any one victory. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a framework that others could follow to protect themselves from exploitation and abuse. Writing remained central to my journey. My first book had sold more than 200,000 copies, with all royalties redirected to the foundation. Each letter from readers became a testament to the importance of sharing my truth. Many seniors wrote to me, expressing relief that they were not alone, that someone had finally spoken about a reality they had suffered in silence. These letters, filled with gratitude and often tears, reminded me that the pain I had endured had been transformed into something profoundly meaningful. Physically, I had never felt better. The stress that had once racked my body, headaches, insomnia, trembling hands, had vanished. My doctor, Dr. Hernandez, often marveled at my improvement. "Aurora," he said during my last checkup, "your body is responding as though you are a decade younger. Your blood pressure, sleep, and posture, everything reflects peace and autonomy." It was a reminder that liberation was not just emotional but physical. Reclaiming my dignity had healed more than my spirit. It had healed my body as well. The occasional contact with Ethan remained a delicate matter. Over 2 years, he had attempted to reach me only 3 times. Each interaction was transactional, motivated by self-interest rather than remorse. When Oliver, my grandson, was born, Ethan called, but not to apologize, only to discuss financial arrangements. I had created a trust fund for Oliver's future, ensuring that his education and security would not be compromised by his parents' failings. I had learned that sometimes love requires detachment, that true protection meant stepping back and setting boundaries even when it pained me. I often thought about the contrast between the life I had lost and the one I had created. The illusions of family that had bound me were gone, but in their place were connections built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. Margaret, the 74-year-old woman whose son had sold her car without permission, sent me a photograph of herself smiling beside her new vehicle. Her letter read, "Aurora, you taught me that survival is not cruelty, and that self-love is a necessity. I finally feel free." Moments like these reminded me that my journey had a broader meaning, proof that even late in life, it is possible to reclaim agency and self-respect. The foundation's work became a daily mission. I spent 3 days a week at our offices, assisting seniors directly, providing guidance and emotional support. 2 days were dedicated to home visits, meeting families, and offering advice to those unable to travel. Weekends were reserved for writing, reflection, and planning educational materials for our next campaigns. Every encounter was an opportunity to teach, to prevent harm, and to empower those who had suffered in silence for too long. I also found joy in quieter pursuits. The community garden we established became a sanctuary, not just for me, but for other residents in our building. I taught about medicinal plants and organic gardening, sharing knowledge accumulated over decades. The simple act of nurturing life became symbolic, a reflection of the growth and renewal I had achieved in my own life. These days of work, teaching, and reflection provided a balance between purpose and serenity, a harmony that had been absent during the years of manipulation and betrayal. Evenings were often spent with Lucy and Amelia, discussing the foundation, our cases, or simply enjoying quiet conversation over tea. Joseph, too, remained a constant presence, his laughter and wisdom a steady reminder of the resilience found in friendship. We celebrated successes quietly, aware that each recovered senior, each restored property, and each educational seminar represented lives transformed. The work was demanding, often emotionally heavy, but it was the work that made the trials of the past bearable. Through all of this, I reflected on the lessons learned. True family is not always defined by blood. It is defined by respect, love, and shared values. Self-respect and dignity are non-negotiable, even in the face of betrayal. And perhaps most importantly, it is never too late to reclaim control over one's life, to write a new chapter that is authentic, meaningful, and free from the shadows of exploitation. As I sit here on my balcony tonight, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, I often think about the night that changed everything. The night Juliet slapped me and demanded my house keys. That moment of shock, anger, and humiliation seems almost unreal now, yet I carry it with me not as a scar, but as a symbol of the moment I chose to stand. It was the first step toward a life where my dignity mattered more than anyone else. Escreed, a life where I no longer allowed fear to dictate my choices. I have come to understand that abuse, especially within families, is often quiet and insidious before it becomes public. Small, subtle pressures, disguised as concern or love, can slowly erode confidence and self-worth. Those early comments about my age, the hints that I could no longer manage my affairs, the sly manipulations to gain control, they were all warnings I initially dismissed out of love. It is easy to ignore red flags when they come from the people we are supposed to trust the most, but ignoring them only gives power to the manipulators. I see the same patterns every week at the foundation. Seniors who have been pressured to sell homes, hand over savings, or allow control of their assets often arrive confused, anxious, and ashamed. They feel that speaking up makes them cruel or ungrateful. But my experience proves the opposite. Speaking up, setting boundaries, and demanding respect is an act of courage, not betrayal. I tell them the truth I wish I had known sooner. Self-respect is never selfish. Protecting yourself is never wrong. And it is never too late to reclaim what is yours both materially and emotionally. The media attention I received after my interview with Catherine Diaz brought more than fame. It brought validation not just for me, but for everyone who had been silenced by those they trusted. Stories poured in from across the country, letters, emails, and social media messages from seniors who recognized their own struggles in mine. I thought I was alone, one woman wrote. Now I see that standing up doesn't mean I'm disloyal. It means I am human. These words became my compass, reminding me that the pain I endured had purpose beyond personal justice. It had become a beacon for those who needed guidance, courage, and hope. Writing my second book has been a continuation of that mission. It is practical, grounded in real cases we have handled, and filled with strategies for detecting and preventing family financial abuse. I write not just to tell a story, but to teach, to equip others with the tools I wish I had had when my son and his fiancée conspired against me. Each page is an invitation to recognize manipulation, establish boundaries, and reclaim agency. For me, education and empowerment are the most powerful antidotes to abuse. There are moments, of course, when I allow myself to reflect on Ethan. I miss the boy he once was, the glimpses of kindness and potential I had once cherished. I miss the illusion of family, the warmth and comfort I had imagined would last a lifetime. But I do not miss the manipulation, the coercion, or the emotional blackmail. I have learned that love is not submission, and that protecting oneself does not negate affection. Loving someone, even your own child, does not mean sacrificing your dignity or your safety. That is a lesson I hope one day Ethan will understand. Oliver, my grandson, remains the tenderest point in my heart. He does not know me yet, and circumstances have kept him distant. But I have created a trust fund for his education and future, ensuring that he will never bear the consequences of adult misbehavior. I hope that one day he will choose to know me, not because I demand it, but because he sees the value of family built on love, respect, and integrity. In the meantime, I focus on what I can control, protecting him indirectly and ensuring that the mistakes of the past do not follow him into adulthood. The foundation has become my lifeblood, a place where I see tangible change every day. Margaret's smile in her new car, the relief in a senior's eyes when they regain control of their property, the gratitude expressed in letters and calls, these moments outweigh the pain of the past. I witness resilience flourishing in others, and in turn, I feel my own spirit renewed. It is an endless cycle of giving and healing, one that transforms not just individual lives, but entire communities. The work we do also reminds me that justice is rarely swift, but it is meaningful when pursued diligently. Ethan and Juliet face legal consequences, financial ruin, and shattered reputations, but their downfall is secondary to the victories I see in the seniors who have regained their independence. My battle was never about vengeance. It was about truth, dignity, and accountability. And those lessons, I hope, will ripple outward, touching families for generations. At 70, I have found peace not in the absence of challenges, but in the presence of purpose. Each day brings a new opportunity to educate, protect, and mentor. I have built a life filled with intention, where every action, every decision, and every relationship is guided by principles of respect and authenticity. The apartment that once witnessed my humiliation now hosts conferences, workshops, and quiet reflections. It is a space of empowerment, proof that even after betrayal, life can be reclaimed. Tonight, as I watch the city lights, I think about the message I would send to my past self, the Aurora who walked into that ballroom 2 years ago. I would say, have courage. What you are about to endure will hurt deeply, but it will also lead you to a life more authentic than you ever imagined. Stand firm, set your boundaries, and never let anyone diminish your worth. Peace is waiting for you on the other side, and I know now, with certainty, that every painful moment was worth it. For in reclaiming my dignity, I discovered purpose, empowerment, and the freedom to live life on my terms.